My colleagues, Laura Curtis and Robert Mutry, and I put together some suggestions for lobbying bills in legislative committees. And we think that when preparing to lobby legislative committees, the focus is on staff and then the legislators themselves. And of course, for committee work, there are two types of staff for this purpose: the committee staff, the consultants, both the majority and minority party consultants, and of course the staff for the individual members who sit on those standing committees. Note that there are 33 standing committees currently in the California State Assembly, as well as 22 Senate standing committees. Committee staff, who are called committee consultants, are those who work directly for the policy and fiscal committees of the California Legislature. And then the legislators' individual staff, known as member staff, are those who work directly for a member of the Assembly or the Senate. And of course, those Assembly members and senators sit on those standing committees. Beginning with the committee staff, each committee has majority and minority party consultants. Now, theoretically, the consultants who staff the policy and fiscal committees do work for all the members who sit on that particular committee. However, they're also answerable to the chair. And obviously, the chair is a member of the majority party. And therefore, the majority party generally controls what legislative measures pass and what fail in the standing committees of the Assembly and Senate. And because of this general majority control of the committees, the Assembly and Senate Republican caucuses have staff that support their members on these standing committees. Usually those Republican caucus consultants staff more than one standing committee. So it's important, of course, to discuss as early as possible your client support or opposition or just stating concerns with legislative measures once they're referred to or pending before those standing committees. And of course, you want to meet with the committee consultants at the committee itself, as well as the relevant consultant at the Assembly or Senate Republican caucuses. These committee consultants, of course, represent the members of the committees, and they will prepare a written analysis of each bill for those bills that are heard and voted upon by the committee. And those consultants also brief the members and the staff who sit on their particular committees. The consultation usually begins with the chair of the committee so that the chair's recommendation on how to vote on a particular measure can be shared with the remaining committee members, generally the majority party members. So you'll obviously want to meet early with committee staff before they complete their analyses and the recommendations from the chair. Although the committee will often publish a deadline for submission of position letters on measures, those deadlines sometimes don't allow the consultant enough time to fully consider perhaps all the concerns and be able to incorporate all of them into their committee bill analyses. And therefore, it's obviously a good idea, hopefully, to speak with the committee consultant early on and make sure that you provide them with the support and opposition, whichever side you are taking, and any relevant materials so that they can fully consider them as they analyze the bill and meet with other interest groups, and of course meet with legislators and staff and naturally their committee chair. So you want to meet with the committee consultants early, and perhaps you'll have one or more follow-up visits that might be appropriate or even necessary to address concerns or work on amendments or bring information that perhaps you didn't have in that first go around. And you want to make sure that you're well aware of any concerns, both of the committee consultants as well as any of the committee members or their staff. And if the committee consultants are providing or proposing any amendments to your measure, so that you can be aware of it and talk with the author of the bill, certainly if you're the sponsor of the measure or in support. And of course, even if you're opposing the legislative measure, perhaps one or more of those committee recommended amendments will be helpful to your position. Naturally, bring copies of any relevant materials, of course, your support letter or your opposition letter, whatever position you have. Perhaps you have a coalition letter, some press coverage, there might be a study, a report, or other information that helps bolster your position, again, in support or opposition. As the hearing nears, you want to hopefully find out what the chair's recommendation is, and also the vice chair's recommendation to their respective committee colleagues. And you'll want to determine whether the consultants are recommending, again, any amendments to the bill, what the arguments are for those amendments, and whether or not, for example, the author of your bill should accept one or more of those amendments. When you're meeting with the members who sit on that standing committee, again, make sure to meet in advance of the hearing, but keep in mind how busy those legislators and their staffers are, particularly during crunch time in committee hearing weeks. So you can't get to them too early, because they may not be focused on that legislation. Perhaps they're focused on this week's or next week's hearing, and your bill is in a week or two or longer. So you don't want to go too early, and of course you don't want to go too late. So you probably, in most instances, try and schedule a meeting probably the week before, particularly for committees that meet on a weekly basis. Really, the legislator and his or her staff are focused on that week's hearing or the upcoming hearing. So don't get in early when they're focused on the one that's immediately before them. You'll ultimately want to meet with all the offices for the members who sit on that committee. So hopefully you have a relatively accurate vote count prior to the hearing. You shouldn't make assumptions and skip offices. Try and find out what their position on. Sometimes you're pleasantly surprised that a legislator who you didn't think might be sharing your client's point of view will actually be voting your way, or perhaps sympathetic, and you can follow up with them. Generally, the members and certainly the staff of those members who sit on relevant policy committees often have a considerable amount of knowledge and subject matter experience, certainly familiarity with a lot of the bills that come before those committees for a vote. In other instances, perhaps with newer legislators, they may not have as much background. So be sure to understand what experience or expertise a member and his or her staff might bring to a specific policy committee or subject matters of a bill. And of course, if you have to do any follow-up with legislative offices prior to the scheduled committee vote, particularly those who might have had questions or asked for additional information or asked a question that you couldn't at that time answer, make sure that you get that to them before they stake out a position on the bill. And then hopefully when you've answered that question or provided the additional requested information, hopefully you'll get a better sense or a clearer idea how that legislator plans to vote on the particular bill or legislative measure. And don't sit idly by. Make sure you respond quickly and appropriately to legislators or staff who pose questions or ask you for additional information. Now, as I've said before, remember the compressed timeline and the full calendar for committee hearings, especially for committees that are meeting every single week, like, every Tuesday at 9 a.m. or Wednesday afternoons at 1:30. Members often don't get briefed by their staff until the day before or a few days before the hearing. So they may not have formulated a position on a particular measure. So you may not know all the votes sometimes until the day of. hopefully the day before, but sometimes it's the day of the scheduled hearing, which obviously can sometimes complicate your lobbying efforts. So just be aware of that scenario. For dealing with the advocates or the interest groups on the other side of the bill or legislative measure, I think it's also important to meet with them early on in the process so that you get an understanding of their position, why they hold those particular areas of concern or that stated position, and to discuss, potential amendments that might address any of those concerns. And of course, as a professional courtesy, you should apprise the other side about any amendments, for example, that you are planning or that your author is planning to author or set forth. And if you can't resolve the other side's concerns, hey, at least you're aware of the messages and their position and at least your reply or your rebuttal and whether or not you have particular counter arguments to what they're contemplating or what they're advocating for. And this way you can also explain to legislators and their staff that, you engaged in good faith efforts to meet with the opposition and resolve possible concerns. And this also allows you to give a full picture to legislators and their staff who are sitting on those committees of both your position as well as the opposition's position. And so make sure that you also keep your bill author and their staff aware of conversations that you're having with interest groups, with the other side, and obviously committee members and their staff. Now, at the hearing, you'll want to have either yourself prepared or a witness, perhaps someone from your client company or trade association or interest group or a constituent, that they're prepared to testify and that they know what to say and how to say it and how much time they have in which they have to say it. And hopefully, frankly, if you've done your work well before the hearing, the public hearing sort of a foregone conclusion and a formality because you have a pretty good idea of the final outcome of the vote prior to it taking place. But nonetheless, it's important to have testimony prepared to highlight your key arguments in support or opposition to a bill, as well as to address those issues that the other side are making. And be prepared and aware of possible questions that committee members may pose. For example, an analysis might have some questions in the analysis that a legislator might pick up on and raise in the committee hearing. The committee staff, again, might be recommending an amendment or two, and so you should be prepared, as is your author will be, hopefully, to address any of those comments in the analyses or particular amendments that are being proposed by the committee, and take those types of things into account when you're preparing, your talking points, your testimony for the hearing. Make sure that you or your witness understand how the committee is operating. Some of them operate differently. So you want to make sure how the time is allocated. Some allocate, say 10 minutes for all the supporters and 10 for the opponents, and they don't care how many people speak. You just have to do it within the set time period. Most other committees have what they call the 2 and 2 rule, 2 principal witnesses in support and 2 in opposition. They generally limit the amount of time to 2 to 3 minutes per primary witness, and then everybody else gets to be a Me Too witness where they just get to state their client's name and their position. And of course, if you're the sponsor of a bill, you're probably expected to give the primary testimony, or at least your client is, in support of the bill that you're sponsoring. And you might be called upon by your bill author to draft an opening statement for the legislator, maybe prepare some questions and answers so that the legislator is prepared to address those. Certainly you want to review what the other side is arguing, any potential questions that might be raised by committee members, And, you've got to prepare your author for that kind of, for those types of questions or concerns or possible amendments to be raised at the committee hearing.